I never thought my own son would push me to the floor on Christmas Eve, but that's exactly what happened. My name is Teresa Vaughan. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that love and sacrifice were enough to hold a family together. That night, I learned how wrong I was. When my husband passed away 10 years ago, I threw myself into our company, Vaughan Interiors. Every design, every contract, every sleepless night was for one reason: to give my son, Daniel, a future. And I did. By 42, he was the CEO, the face of everything I'd built from nothing. That Christmas Eve, I arrived at Daniel's house in Boston with my arms full of gifts and a bottle of Merlot I had been saving for years. The house was glowing garlands, golden lights, the smell of roasted turkey, the sound of carols playing softly from the living room. My grandchildren, Josh and Isabel, ran toward me, their laughter bright enough to warm the cold December air. But behind their joy, something felt off. My daughter-in-law, Erica, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And at the dinner table, I noticed an extra chair, a place I hadn't seen before. When I asked, she said lightly, "Oh, that's for my father. He'll be joining us soon." Her father, Richard Cole, a man I had once competed against for years in the design world. The last person I expected at my family's Christmas dinner. When he arrived, Daniel changed. His tone, his posture, his entire presence shifted. Suddenly, he was the perfect host, laughing too loudly, trying too hard. And when we sat down, I took my usual place at the head of the table, the same spot I had occupied since my husband's passing. But Daniel stood behind me, tense. "Mom," he said quietly, "that seat's for Mr. Cole tonight." I looked up at him, confused. "Daniel, I've always sat here. It's tradition." He wouldn't look me in the eye. "Please, don't make this difficult." Before I could answer, his hands were on my shoulders. The push wasn't hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to humiliate. My body hit the floor. The silverware clattered. The children gasped. And in that stunned silence, I heard him say the words that shattered something inside me forever. "This seat belongs to my father-in-law." That night, as I lay on the cold tile, I realized something vital: respect, once lost, can never be begged back. It has to be reclaimed. The rest of that dinner passed like a slow, painful blur. My son carried on as if nothing had happened, cutting slices of turkey for his guests, while I sat quietly in a side chair, invisible in my own family. The children's laughter faded, replaced by awkward silence, and though my body ached, it was my heart that felt truly broken. When the meal finally ended, I excused myself and went to the upstairs bathroom. The mirror above the sink reflected a woman I barely recognized, gray hair slightly undone, a bruise forming on her shoulder, and eyes that had stopped pleading for understanding. For the first time in years, I wasn't sad. I was clear. I took a deep breath and whispered to my reflection, "No more." At 9:37 p.m., I pulled out my phone and dialed the first number I knew by heart. "Henry," I said when my lawyer picked up, still groggy from his Christmas dinner. "Teresa, is everything all right? I need you to revoke all of Daniel's legal powers in the company first thing tomorrow morning. Every single one. Remove his access to the accounts, contracts, and client files." There was a long silence. Then Henry said softly, "Understood." The second call was to Elaine Fisher, my chief accountant. "Elaine, it's Teresa. Freeze all joint accounts with Daniel. Every card, every transfer. Don't ask questions, just do it." "Of course," she replied, her voice steady but curious. "May I ask if something happened?" "Yes," I said. I opened my eyes. The third call was to Robert Hayes, my deputy and one of the few people I still trusted. "Robert," I said calmly, "tomorrow morning, I want you in the office before 8. You'll be sitting in Daniel's chair." He hesitated. "Ma'am, are you sure? It's Christmas Eve." I've never been more sure of anything. When I hung up, I stood there for a long moment, listening to the faint sound of laughter downstairs. Daniel was telling a story, trying to impress Richard Cole. Their voices carried through the hallway light, careless, comfortable, and I realized that they had no idea what had just begun. I looked back at the mirror, at the woman staring at me. There was no rage in her eyes, only a quiet strength, the kind that comes after years of swallowing pain. That night, I didn't plan revenge. I planned recovery, not from the fall but from the illusion that love could survive without respect. Christmas morning in Boston arrived wrapped in silence. Snow had covered the streets, the kind of soft white that makes the whole world look peaceful. But inside Daniel's house, chaos was about to begin. At 7:10 a.m., while his children were opening gifts by the fireplace, Daniel's phone started buzzing on the kitchen counter. At first he ignored it, holiday spam, he thought, but then came the second ring, the third, and the fourth. By the time he picked it up, there were already 12 missed calls. Strange, he murmured, frowning. He stepped away from the living room to answer. Mr. Vaughan, this is Melissa from Chase Bank. We need to inform you that the financial guarantees under your account were revoked this morning. What? That's impossible. Those are joint guarantees with my mother. Not anymore, sir. Miss Teresa Vaughn signed the cancellation herself. All linked credit and mortgage accounts are now under immediate review. Before he could respond, another call came in. Bank of America Risk Department, your business line of credit has been suspended. And then another. Mr. Vaughan, your vehicle lease has entered default. The dealership will be sending a tow truck this afternoon. And another. Your executive salary has been frozen pending authorization from the new acting CEO, Mr. Robert Hayes. Daniel stood frozen in the hallway, his face pale. The phone kept lighting up. Within minutes, there were 27 missed calls. Then 32. Then 47. Across town, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the same snow fall gently outside my window. The phone on my counter was silent. I didn't need to look at it to know what was happening. I wasn't celebrating vengeance, I was reclaiming order. Daniel had always believed that success meant control. He thought he could control people, circumstances, even me. What he never understood was that I'd spent a lifetime building the foundations he stood on, and I could remove them just as easily. By 9 a.m., the messages poured in from my staff. Transition complete. Bank account secured. Access rights revoked. I read each one slowly, feeling neither joy nor anger, only peace. At that same moment, Daniel sat at his dining table surrounded by wrapping paper and untouched breakfast plates, staring at his phone in disbelief. His wife, Erica, walked in holding a mug of coffee. "What's wrong?" she asked. He lifted his head slowly. "Everything." She looked at the screen, 47 missed calls, and sighed. "Your mother." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Somewhere deep inside he knew. That morning, my son learned the first real lesson of adulthood. The world doesn't stop being fair just because it's inconvenient. By noon, Daniel's perfect world had started to crumble. The calls from the banks turned into formal notices, his company email was locked, his corporate cards declined. The marble floor of his elegant home suddenly felt like thin ice. He tried calling me 6 times. I didn't answer. On the 7th attempt, he left a message. "Mom, I don't know what you're doing, but this isn't fair. You're ruining my life." I listened to it once, then deleted it. Fair. That word tasted bitter coming from his mouth. Meanwhile, Erica paced through the living room, panic setting in. "What did you do, Daniel?" The bank just called. They said the mortgage guarantee was revoked. How could that happen? "I'll fix it," he snapped, running his hands through his hair. "She'll calm down once I explain." But we both knew I wasn't angry. I was finished. At 1:15 p.m., the doorbell rang. A man in uniform stood outside. "Mr. Vaughan, I'm here on behalf of the dealership. Your vehicle is being repossessed." Daniel froze. "What are you talking about? I've made every payment." "Not without your guarantor, sir," the man replied, almost apologetically. "Without Mrs. Vaughan's signature, the contract is void." Erica's face drained of color. "My father's coming over. You'd better fix this before he sees what's going on." But Richard Cole didn't come to sympathize. When he arrived, he barely looked at Daniel. Instead, he turned to Erica and said, "Take the kids upstairs." Then, in that deep, measured voice that had commanded boardrooms for decades, he spoke to my son. "I witnessed what you did last night, Daniel. You humiliated your mother in front of your children and me. I will not tolerate that in my family." "Mr. Cole, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Richard interrupted. "A man who can shove his own mother to the ground doesn't need business partners. He needs a conscience." With that, he left. By the end of the day, Erica had packed a suitcase for herself and the children. The house, once filled with laughter, echoed with emptiness. Daniel stood by the window, watching her drive away, the tow truck following behind with his car. Across town, I sat in my office at Vaughn Interiors, signing the final document that transferred Daniel's position to Robert Hayes. Richard Cole sat across from me, his expression calm. "I want to invest, Teresa," he said. "You build things that last." I looked up and met his eyes. "So do you," I replied. "Let's make sure what we build next has stronger foundations." In the weeks that followed, Daniel's world collapsed piece by piece. The mortgage company reclaimed the house, the credit cards were cancelled, and his name began to vanish from every corporate document he once signed. He had spent years living in the shadow of borrowed power, and now that shadow had disappeared. He moved into a small rented apartment on the edge of the city, one bedroom, peeling wallpaper, no warmth except the dim light from a cheap desk lamp. He sat there for hours, staring at his reflection in the window, wondering how everything had slipped away in just 24 hours. He tried calling Erica again, but her number had changed. He emailed her father, Richard Cole, hoping to appeal to reason. The reply was short and sharp. "I do not associate with men who disrespect their mothers." That single sentence cut deeper than any financial loss. At night, Daniel walked through the streets of Boston, his breath fogging in the cold. The Christmas lights were still up in the city squares, but to him they looked distant, almost cruel reminders of a warmth he no longer deserved. He applied for job after job, sending resume after resume, but every company he reached out to seemed to know the story. The son who had humiliated Teresa Vaughan, the man who lost his inheritance overnight. No one wanted him. 2 months later, with his savings gone, he took the only position offered, a janitorial job for an office cleaning company. The night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. His first assignment, a downtown building that, ironically, housed the offices of Vaughan Interiors. On his first night, he stood in the marble lobby, mop in hand, looking up at the logo his mother had designed years ago, her name shining proudly in silver letters. For the first time in his life, Daniel understood what it meant to feel small. He didn't curse or cry. He just began to clean. Each motion of the mop across the floor was a silent confession, a quiet prayer for forgiveness no one had asked him to say. Across the city, I was asleep when my phone buzzed. A message from Elaine, my accountant, company account stable. Transition smooth, new contracts secured. I smiled faintly, turned off the phone, and went back to sleep. Daniel was finally learning the lessons I could never teach him with words. Over the next few months, Daniel's hands grew rough, his back ached, and his pride dissolved into something quieter, something almost human. He worked through long nights, polishing floors, cleaning desks, and emptying trash bins while others slept. The world no longer addressed him as Mr. Vaughan. To most of his co-workers, he was simply Dan. And strangely, he found comfort in that. Among the cleaning crew was a retired bus driver named Miguel who worked to support his grandchildren. One night, during their short coffee break, Miguel said, "You're new. What did you do before this?" Daniel hesitated. "Construction, management mostly." Miguel nodded. "Then you know the rule: respect the tools, respect the people. Everything else follows." Daniel smiled faintly, realizing it was the simplest lesson he had ignored his whole life. As the weeks passed, the rhythm of physical work brought him a strange kind of peace. He learned that dignity wasn't tied to status or wealth, it was in showing up, even when no one noticed. Every night he wiped the fingerprints off glass doors. He thought of the ways he had smudged his own life, leaving marks on others that couldn't be cleaned so easily. Meanwhile, I began visiting Josh and Isabel every Sunday. They were growing fast, both wiser than their years. One afternoon, while Isabel showed me her drawings, she said softly, "Grandma, Dad says he's working really hard now. He's not the same anymore." I paused, then smiled gently. "That's good, sweetheart. Sometimes people have to start over to find themselves again." That night I sat by the window of my home, the same one where I had watched the snow fall months ago. I thought of my son not with anger but with quiet acceptance. I didn't want revenge anymore. What I wanted was balance. And in his silence, in his struggle, Daniel was finally beginning to understand the one thing I had prayed he would. That respect cannot be demanded or inherited. It must be earned one humble act at a time. A full year passed before the sound of Christmas music stopped making Daniel flinch. He had settled into a simple rhythm: work, sleep, save a little, call his children once a week. The bitterness had faded, replaced by quiet endurance. But as December returned, so did the weight of memory. On Christmas Eve, after finishing his shift, Daniel sat in his small apartment surrounded by the silence of early morning. The city outside glowed with light, but his room was still. On the table lay a pen, a stack of paper, and an envelope. He began to write. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know what I've learned." The words came slowly, then all at once. He wrote about losing everything, about the nights he spent cleaning offices, about Miguel and the quiet lessons of honest work. He wrote about the shame he had carried, the echo of his mother's fall replaying in his head every time he bent down to pick something up. "I used to think you were controlling," he confessed. "Now I understand you were the only one who kept me from losing myself. You didn't punish me, you gave me space to meet the man I should have been all along." He paused, staring at the last line he had written. For the first time, his eyes filled with tears not of guilt, but of release. He finished with, "I'm proud of who I'm becoming, not because I've succeeded, but because I've finally learned to stand on my own. If we never speak again, I want you to know that you raised a good man. It just took me too long to realize it." He folded the letter carefully, sealed the envelope, and wrote my name, Teresa Vaughan. The next morning he mailed it. A week later, when the letter arrived, I sat in my garden, sunlight resting softly on the pages. I read it once, then twice, each word carving through the distance that had grown between us. When I finished, I reached for a blank card and wrote just one sentence. "I'm proud of the man you are becoming. Stay that way." Then I sealed it, and for the first time in a long while, my heart felt light. That winter was the calmest one I had known in years. The company was thriving again, the house was quiet, and the snow outside seemed softer somehow, like the world had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I often thought of Daniel not with regret, but with a kind of peace that only time can give. He still didn't visit, and I didn't ask him to. Some distances aren't punishments, there's space for healing. Josh and Isabel told me he was doing well, saving money, helping others at his new job. I didn't need to see him to believe it. I could hear the change in their voices. One evening I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the lights from the city flicker in the distance. The same skyline I once looked at in anger now felt like a promise. I thought about how easy it is for love to turn into control, and for control to disguise itself as care. We raise our children to be strong, but we forget that sometimes being strong means letting them fall. That night, I finally understood what forgiveness truly meant. Forgiveness wasn't about reopening old doors or pretending the past hadn't hurt. It was about standing on your own and saying, "I wish you well," without bitterness. It was choosing peace over pride. As I turned off the light, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for my son to come back, but for him to keep walking in the right direction. Because real love doesn't need to be seen to exist, it just keeps shining quietly, like the lamp that glows even after you leave the room. If this story touched you, share it. Somewhere, there's a mother who needs to hear that it's okay to let go. It's not cruelty, it's courage. And sometimes letting go is the only way to hold on to love.